Today's episode is brought to you by Alexandra Park BJJ. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a full-contact martial art and combat sport that was developed in Brazil in the 20th century. With roots in Judo and Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, has been developed and refined into a unique grappling art with the aim to allow a smaller and weaker individual to beat a bigger and stronger opponent with the application of proper technique. Based in Muswell Hill, North London, Alexandra Park BJJ's classes are designed so that you can develop your fitness levels, balance, coordination and flexibility in a no-pressure environment, and to provide the opportunity to start a new sport at a reasonable price. At Alexandra Park BJJ, we aim to be inclusive so that everyone can benefit from this incredible art, not just the athletic or ultra-competitive. To book your free class, head over to alexandraparkbjj.co.uk or email inquiries at alexandraparkbjj.co.uk.
Welcome to Audiobookish, an audiobook review and discussion podcast looking at audiobooks both big and small, as well as radio plays, narrative podcasts, anything audiobook-ish. This podcast may contain spoilers, rants, curse words, mispronunciations of names and places, and more.
Hello everyone, you're listening to Audiobookish. My name's Fahed Rahman, and as always I'm joined by Poppy Knight.
Hello.
And this is our British Book Awards special for 2024. What we're going to be doing this episode is we're just going to be doing a quick roundup of all the books on the shortlist for Audiobook of the Year non-fiction, and there's 6 titles on the shortlist. We'll just be having a quick chat about all of them.
Mm-hmm.
So, the first book on the shortlist is Unruly by David Mitchell. Discover who we are and how we got here by listening to comedian and student of history David Mitchell's Unruly. A history of England's kings and queens, a thoughtful, funny exploration of the founding fathers and mothers of England and subsequently Britain. Think you know your kings and queens? Think again. In Unruly, David Mitchell explores how England's monarchs, while acting as feared rulers firmly guiding their subjects' destinies, were in reality a bunch of lucky sods who were mostly as silly and weird in real life as they appear today in their portraits. A funny book about a serious subject, Unruly is for anyone who has ever wondered how we got here and who is to blame. Before we begin our discussions, I just would like to thank the British Book Awards for sending us advanced review copies of most of the titles on the shortlist. It's been very greatly appreciated. So I'm quite a big fan of David Mitchell. I think we both kind of enjoy his performances on Would You Lie to Me, especially the episodes with Bob Mortimer. But so it's, if you're familiar with David Mitchell, kind of his shtick, his personality of getting into these bouts of like anger about and rants and stuff like that. There's a little bit of that in this book, but I found his kind of understanding of the topic kind of quite surprisingly deep.
Okay.
Kind of what were your kind of expectations and if they were met or not?
Yeah, I think they were, Matt. I think I was expecting, he'd have good subject knowledge. I know he's very interested in a wide range of things. I've seen stuff he's done before about like linguistics and things like that has been really enjoyable. So I kind of imagined it would be a similar thing to that, but on the topic of history. And I felt like, it met up to that. I like him as a performer, as you've said, and so was already ready to get on board with him kind of telling me the story and stuff like that. And it's a subject I'm not really interested in. I'm not really interested in the royals. I'm not really interested in history, and certainly royal history. But it's still interesting listening to him. And I did find interesting, certainly, like the stuff it starts with about how this island we live on has been divvied up over the years and different invasions and stuff like that. That kind of thing I do find interesting. And, I've looked into that through the linguistic change and how that's connected before. So I liked dipping back into that again and learning for that. And he's an engaging person to listen to tell you stuff.
Yeah, I think he's a brilliant narrator. I'm not too sure if he's done other audiobooks, but I can imagine if he was I mean, his voice is very listenable to, if that makes sense. Particularly like there's an early section on in the book where he talks about kind of like the histories of like Scotland and Wales, and how when the English think about Britain, they don't really take those two other countries into account. And I think he kind of makes the point that the English tend to think whatever is best for England is best for Britain, and that's not always the case. No. So that is kind of I think he kind of makes quite astute points like that through the book.
Yeah, what I think was really important about this book, that he makes this case, is the fact that it's very much about identity and about national identity, more so than kind of like this person lived from this age to this age kind of thing. It is very much about identity, and you know, kind of the way he puts it is that difference between history versus the past. Yes. And history is a very different thing to the past. History is how we build our national identity based on the stories of what's come before and the ideologies that we want to connect with that. And yeah, it talks about kind of how some stuff might be true, might not be true. We generally agree on this, but what he was focused on was what is part of our history. Yeah. And some of that might not be true, but it is part of our history. That kind of thing was really fascinating. And the way he explains it in the introduction as well, I really liked.
Yeah, I think one of my favourite podcasts that I listen to is We Have Ways of Making You Talk, which is a World War II history podcast by Al Murray. And one of the things that they, you know, him and his co-host constantly talk about is that historians, their job is to constantly reappraise what's happened in the past and find new ways of like interpreting it or digging out kind of extra details. I think that very much what David is trying to do with this book here. So I quite enjoyed it. I can completely see why it's on the shortlist. I think both in terms of content and the quality of the narration, it deserves to be there. Yeah,
very fair.
Should we move on to the second book?
Can do. So the second book is The Diary of a CEO by Steven Bartlett. The latest book by Steven Bartlett, entrepreneur, podcaster, and Dragon's Den star. This is not a book about business strategy. Strategy changes like the seasons. This is a book about something much more permanent. It is about the fundamental laws that will ensure excellence. These laws will work now or in 100 years from now. Are you ready to get started? With highlights of original interviews from the Diary of a CEO podcast, this enhanced audiobook edition of The Diary of a CEO takes you to the heart of the 33 laws for success.
Okay, do you want to start with this one? Because I'm a bit critical, so I think it would be maybe better to start with. I'm assuming you might have a better opinion of the book than I do, but yeah, let's.
Well, I've certainly tried to be balanced, especially because, yes, you did give me the heads up that you were finding this one a little frustrating. Yeah. But I do have some criticisms as well. But I guess going to the end then, what I found is that overall, I did end up getting more into it as I went on. I didn't hate it. And I do think it's got some good stuff in there. I think it's worth saying that I'm not sure I fully agree with that blurb and with the way, you know, it is very much in line with what he says the book's aims are. That's kind of like, these are truths, these are fundamentals that'll help you exceed in life, not just in business. I think a lot of them are still very business focused and specifically very marketing focused. Certainly kind of chapters that I listen to, as you may have guessed, we're doing this on a tighter turnaround than our other British Book Award kind of 3-part mini-series. And yeah, we've listened to good chunks of these, but not absolutely all of it. But the ones I've listened to certainly have been very much about kind of like, you know, the psychology of what makes someone more likely to buy something kind of thing. And it's not necessarily the kindest use of psychology, you know what I mean? It's manipulative. But that's kind of what marketing is, isn't it? You need to be manipulating your audience into getting them to do that stuff. But I'm therefore not sure you really can apply it to all areas of life. I think that then makes you quite a manipulative person. Yeah. So I do think there's some good lessons in there, and do think there's some good lessons that you can apply to other areas of life that aren't just business, but I would listen to it with some skepticism. I, wouldn't take absolutely everything as a rule, but there's some interesting stuff, and I did get more into it as I went on. Okay,
so I mean, I listened to a fair bit of this book because something about it was like deeply annoying to me, and I was just I couldn't figure out what that was, because I've read like self-help books and kind of business and marketing books, and in terms of the content that Steven puts into the book, there's nothing in there that I would say is like egregiously wrong or out of date or like bad per se. It's just kind of like whenever people produce books like this, it's like, you know, the sell is that this is like the definitive like list of things and stuff like that, and like, you know, that's never ever true. It's basically never ever true. And I don't really think if you're putting a statement out like that, you know, these are like the fundamental laws and they never change, you need to kind of really put a strong argument there. And I don't necessarily feel that he always makes the case that he's trying to make as strongly as he would like. The other thing that I found quite grating about him was just Steven Bartlett, his voice. I found, like, for some reason, I don't like, you know, get too personally criticized. I'm sure he's a nice enough bloke, but I found the way that he narrated very grating, and that did take me out of the book. And even the things that I would normally agree with, that is good stuff, just because he was saying it, I was like automatically inclined to disagree. So it's just kind of like, yeah, it was quite an interesting reaction. I was trying to think why I've taken so badly against him, but that's, it's just my personal opinion on him. Sorry, Stephen.
Yeah. No, that's fair. And I think it's important to note that part of the book and the way it's framed, his first chapter is, why should I be writing this book? Why have I got the credentials? And it basically reads like his CV, which I found a bit boring, to be honest, to just hear a CV. But also, it's very braggy. It is very, confident, but comes across in a braggy way, kind of thing. And it's that difficult thing in jobs and business and everything of how do you sell yourself without sounding like a bit of a prick. But yeah, I think that is the tone that this goes for. It is very braggy, and possibly rightly so, but I think that can switch you the wrong way as well, to be kind of like, I don't want to agree with you sort of thing, maybe is part of it.
And kind of like, of all the books on the shortlist, this is probably the only one I can't see why it made it there. There's so many like really good business books out there, and I think there's probably a wider discussion about how these books do get shortlisted, because especially what might just be my Twitter X timeline, there was quite a lot of criticism of the books that were shortlisted this year. And I think for me, the only reason this probably was shortlisted is that Steven Bartlett is quite a big name.
But in the publishing industry, that is a big deal, and certainly at the moment, the pull that a name has for giving a book publicity, for garnering sales, for getting a message out there is a significant factor. So yeah, it's an interesting one and a difficult one, and one that's definitely contentious, as kind of like celebrities and people in different spaces taking up the space of authors who want to be doing this, and researchers and stuff. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I also just wanted to pull, there was something that you said about kind of like not bringing the argument across, and about this being universal, that connected with two things. So one is that I think that scope of like, these are the laws for everything in business and life, and whatever you want to do to succeed, is an extremely broad topic.
Yes.
That sort of, makes me ask, thinking again, publishing, business, why should people go to that book? And he even talks in one of the chapters about, self-help being quite an oversaturated market. And so I then feel personally like it's a bit of the wrong tack to just be like, well, I do everything, because counterintuitively that's not enough of a draw for someone, you know what I mean? If they have a specific problem thing, they're going to look for something on that, that generalness. I almost feel that by claiming that his thing wasn't about business and it was about everything, almost dilutes the power of it and the draw of it. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, clearly, as you say, like, it's been popular, it's sold well, and maybe there is the strategy there. But to me, I feel like it wouldn't have been the pitch I would have made for this book in its kind of conceptual stage. Steven
Bartlett, he's got a very successful podcast. He's made loads of money. He's a very successful person at kind of marketing
exactly,
himself.
Yeah.
So like, he obviously does have a lot to offer, but for me, it didn't work, unfortunately.
Yeah. And then the other thing about you saying about like not getting the point across, looking at the more individual points, so each of these 33 laws, I had a real gripe with this, of the fact that he would name the law in an obscure way a lot of the time. A few words, you don't really know what those words mean and what the law is actually telling you to do. And then he'd spend at least half the chapter with an anecdote that a lot of the time you couldn't even actually get what the anecdote was telling you to get at. And then halfway through, he tells you what the law means and why the anecdote was there, right?
Yeah.
And I personally don't like that because I spend half the chapter not knowing what I'm supposed to take from this. It can work in some ways where the point is that, like, you're telling a story and there's sort of almost a twist at the end kind of thing. The one about the big blue slide in his office, kind of the fact that it leads you on the line of this was a bad idea and then comes back with, actually, no, it was great for our business. That, fair enough. But I think in every other case and in the general sense, what you need to do is you need to name the law, then explain the law. Summarize it, make me understand it, then go into your anecdotes, your research, your everything like that.
It's not an uncommon format in these sort of self-help books, unfortunately. So yeah, it's just one of those things. Let's move on to the next book. Otherwise, we might be ranting about it for quite a long time. A Strong Female Character by Fern Brady. After reading about autism in her teens, Fern Brady knew instinctively that she had it. Autism explained her sensory issues, her meltdowns, her inability to pick up on social cues, and she told her doctors as much. But it took until she was 34 for her to get diagnosed. Strong Female Character is about the years in between and the unique combination of sexism and ableism that so often prevents autistic women from getting diagnosed until adulthood. Coming from a working-class Scottish Catholic family, Fern wasn't exactly poised to receive an open-minded acceptance of a neurodivergence. Strong Female Character is a story of how being female can get in the way of being autistic and how being autistic gets in the way of being the right kind of woman. So I'll start off with this. I really enjoyed the bits that I listened to this. I think Fern performs the book really well. I think she's got, obviously being a comedian, she's got a great knack with words and kind of constructing sentences and barbs and kind of relaying these anecdotes. And I found her take on her experience of being autistic kind of, she explained so much about how, exhausting she finds social interactions and kind of like, I think she uses sort of an analogy of kind of like, running this program all the time to kind of like understand social cues. And I found that fascinating to listen to.
Yeah, I completely agree with all that you've said. I was really keen to listen to this one anyway, and kind of before the shortlist, and I think I was going to suggest it at some point that we review. Because a fan of Fern and her stand-up and appearances on things before. Yeah,
Taskmaster especially, like she, her thing of saying, "Oh, I'm quite tired now." On Taskmaster makes a lot more sense after listening to this. I think so, yeah.
No, that's totally fair. And wanting to know more about autism as well. And I think that is definitely something that is helpful to gain here from a real first-person perspective, to understand better kind of thought processes for people with autism and reasonings behind different behaviours and things like that, things that will make them more comfortable, things that can cause barriers, that kind of thing. From a first person kind of perspective, really helpful. Obviously, first person, different people will, feel differently, respond differently, have different takes, but it's good to actually listen to someone's experience, as opposed to reading it from a medical experience of someone writing it down who hasn't experienced it themselves. And certainly one of the things that's highlighted here is how lacking medical practitioners' knowledge is of autism, and dismissive, outdated, all sorts of things like that really, really needs to change.
Yeah. One of the books we had last year was about menopause and how there is this sexism in medicine where kind of, she mentions it in the book, kind of if she was male or male presenting, then the signs that she was autistic would have been probably picked up a lot sooner. And the fact that she was female kind of prevented her diagnosis. And so that's the other thing that I think it was kind of quite key for me, because I've got a nephew who's on the autistic spectrum as well, and that's kind of when you think about autistic characters just generally in fiction, they do tend to be male. You don't tend to see a lot of female characters. So this, her telling her story like this, I think was is quite important.
Definitely is. And it's something that there's people that I know who've had that experience, and I've come across it kind of at the sidelines, hearing of, that lack of diagnosis, the masking, and various things that has been different for females that have grown up autistic as opposed to males. And whereas the popular culture, I guess, presentation can skew things very much so. And it's interesting that you brought menopause in, because I thought a similar kind of thing as well, especially with parts of it. It's not a medical book.
No.
It's not a medical advice book, but there is research done in there, to get some facts right. And some bits of it made me think of how parts of menopausing was sort of like, if you're thinking of approaching a doctor to try and get diagnosis/treatment, these are the things you need to do. And Fern's isn't as, black and white listed as that, but I imagine there's some stuff that you can take if you're also looking at potentially getting a diagnosis or looking into that, because it takes you through her journey for that, kind of the right things to ask, sort of, or at the very least some things to avoid, or ways to recognize when you're being fobbed off and actually you need to be going somewhere else because this person ain't going to help you, that kind of thing. Quite useful. But it is a memoir. It is different from menopausing. It is a memoir. And also think important to point out, it's a memoir of a comedian, and it does have humour in there for sure, but it isn't a laugh-along book. It's not a Bob Mortimer, jokey, laughy, happy comedian memoir. It is a more serious one, especially because it's themed around this topic and difficulties that have happened related to that. Sort of, I guess, if you want to go two sides of the spectrum, you've got Bob Mortimer on one hand, and you've got 10 Steps to Nanette on the other hand. It's sort of closer to that one if you go in comedian memoirs.
I don't think it's quite as like po-faced.
Not as serious.
Not as serious. I mean, and it is a funny book. One of the favourite sections I'm kind of thinking of at the moment is when she initially tells her dad that she's been diagnosed, and like her dad response, and the way she tells that story is, I found that hilarious. I'm sure she didn't find it that funny at the time, but the way she tells the story about, his response, I found quite funny. So I can completely understand why this is being shortlisted, both in terms of content and in terms of Fern's performance as a narrator.
Yeah, for sure. Agreed.
Okay, so the next book on this list, I think, is a little bit contentious, is Alan Partridge book. Do you want to read out the blurb?
Yes. So, Alan Partridge, Big Beacon by Alan Partridge. In Big Beacon, Norwich's favourite son and best broadcaster Alan Partridge triumphs against the odds twice. Big Beacon tells the story of how Partridge heroically rebuilt his TV career, rising like a phoenix from the desolate wasteland of local radio to climb to the summit of Mount Primetime and regain the nationwide prominence his talent merits. Leaving his old life behind and relocating to a small coastal village in Kent, Alan battles through adversity, wins the hearts and minds of a suspicious community, and ultimately shows himself to be a quite wonderful man while restoring a lighthouse. Okay,
so I think that the big question is, like, I don't want to go all kind of like Father Christmas, like, doesn't exist, but like, is this a non-fiction book? If it's a biography about a fictional character?
I get you.
Yeah.
Difficult to say. Was the restoring of the lighthouse done by Steve Coogan, maybe while in character? Perhaps? I don't know.
I don't know. It's kind of like, it's a bit like meta and confusing. Let's talk about like Alan. I'm going to say Alan Partridge's narration, which I think is kind of quite wonderful. Obviously, if you're a fan of Alan's talents, he does narrate his book beautifully, and his personality certainly comes across in the text as well. What were your kind of expectations of this, and kind of, are you a fan of Alan Partridge? I think that's probably a good question to ask. Yeah.
Well, this is the thing. Not really. I'll be honest. Mostly through to lack of exposure, to be honest. Just never really watched much, listened to much or anything. But not really. And I think that kind of meant I wasn't really primed to enjoy this so much. I wasn't primed to take on the humour. I wasn't really enjoying the humour a lot. There was kind of like explaining obvious things as if they weren't obvious, and I don't know. I feel like there's been examples of that working in other stuff before where I've liked it, so I don't know if I've just been like prejudging or whatever, but I couldn't get on. I could tell where he was trying to make something funny, and I was just like, this ain't working for me, kind of thing. So yeah, but I can totally see that if you are a fan of him, his characters, his comedy, then absolutely you'll love it, I'm sure.
Yeah, for me, I didn't listen to the entire book, but what I did listen to it, I did quite enjoy. I wouldn't say I'm like the biggest Alan Partridge fan in the world, but I do enjoy his broadcast. Why am I talking about him like he's a real person? I enjoy the character.
It's in non-fiction.
It's in non-fiction. Yeah, I do think, I think if you're a fan of Alan Partridge and his output, then this is definitely something that you would enjoy. I think a lot of it, there are a lot of, you do need to kind of know the backstory of the character to get a lot of the jokes. There's especially, references to the people that he broadcasts with, his assistant. If you knew who his assistant was, those sections make a lot more sense and are a lot funnier, kind of like the guy that he does the radio show with. If you've seen those sections on like YouTube and stuff like that, those sections in this book would be kind of a lot funnier. So I think if you are coming to this a bit cold, then I can fully understand why you struggle to kind of like get on board and make sense of this. I think if you're a fan of Alan's work, then this is somewhat of a triumph, I think. But yeah, I do think you do, if you're not aware of the character, then you might struggle a little bit. I mean, kind of my favorite sections in the book, there's one section where he's at a breakfast with other different British TV personalities and stuff like that. And I found that section really funny. And there was one line, I don't usually write down lines when I'm listening to books, but there was one line that I found that was kind of quite funny. Oh yeah, so he described Mumford & Sons as banjo rock. And I found that kind of quite funny. So there's like there's little like barbs like that throughout the book where he's very critical of things in a witty way. So you didn't get on with the book as well as I did, I'm suspecting. So yeah,
not really. Yeah, and maybe I didn't give it long enough. But yeah, as you say, kind of, I'm not really in that world anyway. So maybe it's just kind of one that I'll probably pass on mostly. But I can certainly see why it works well for audio. Certainly, having that character with that recognizable voice, such a strong seasoned performer, can pace his jokes exactly how he wants to, as opposed to you reading them off the page with your own pace, is a real asset in a funny book always.
Yeah, even if you were reading this book, you would be reading it in Alan Partridge's voice.
Fair,
so
yeah.
It's just kind of like
may as well skip the middleman.
May as well skip the middleman. Okay, let's move on to the next book, which is Spare by Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex. It was one of the most searing images of the 20th century. Two young boys, two princes, walking behind their mother's coffin as the world watched in sorrow and horror. As Princess Diana was laid to rest, billions wondered what Prince William and Prince Harry must be thinking and feeling, and how their lives would play out from that point on. For the first time, Prince Harry tells his own story, chronicling his journey with raw, unflinching honesty. A landmark publication, Spare is full of insight, revelation, self-examination, and hard-won wisdom about the eternal power of love over grief. Okay, so I can kind of understand why this book made the shortlist, just because of its cultural significance in the UK. What were your kind of thoughts of it being on the shortlist and your kind of expectations going in?
Yeah, so agree with you. I think it does. I think in the public consciousness and in the publishing industry, massive, topping charts, topping, library loans, retailer sales. And I think especially the fact that this one did so much for audio, even if it...
Oh, did it? I wasn't aware of that. Of that. Yeah.
Even if it was mainly just people taking the clips of it and, using them over Instagram Reels and stuff like that, reacting to the kind of shocking bits of it and stuff like that. Even just that really pulled people to listening to the audio version of it specifically. Certainly the things I was seeing were really, pushing the audio and people really clamoring for the audio, people really wanting that. So I think certainly, for that sense of these being industry awards, it made a huge, massive impact on the industry as well as, cultural significance. Definitely, for sure.
Yeah. So like, whenever you're listening to a book, especially like biographies, usually there needs to be something about them that kind of hooks you in one way or another. So I genuinely don't really care about the royal family too much. But one of the things that did hook me into the book was this idea about grief. He lost his mother at a very early age. Not too long ago, I lost my mother as well. So kind of like books about grief, they're able to get the hooks into me a little easier these days. And yes, I did kind of find those early sections where he was talking about him as a young lad not really understanding what was going on and the funeral stuff quite touching. In terms of his narration, I'd like to get your feedback on this. How did it sound to you? Because certainly, maybe it might have been just the headphones I was listening to it on. There was a weird quality to it. I don't know if that sounded like he was being recorded in like a tin or something.
Oh.
Yeah, so maybe that might have been just my headphone, because I have listened to like clips on TikTok and it didn't sound like that. So fair. I don't know, maybe it was that. But what did you think about the audio quality, like the editing and kind of like his narration generally?
Yeah, I don't think I noticed any particular issue with kind of sound quality and stuff like that. I think his narration wise, it's a very mellow tone, very low, very slow, which, as you say, because a lot of it is about grief, that sort of suits. But obviously that is important for an audiobook because it's very different sitting down and reading something, that can change its tone in the way the sentences are, and that can change your experience of it, versus sitting down listening to something that is very low and slow for the entire time versus very up and energetic versus a mix of both and kind of dynamic or whatever. Yeah. So that is something to take about it. It is a very kind of like contemplative, kind of slow, mellow and low tone during it, but quite pleasant to listen to. And as we've said, and as I was kind of saying with the David Mitchell one, really not interested in the royals. And I'll be honest, I've not really heard Harry speak much. But he does have a pleasant voice to listen to, and pleasantly not as like ridiculously posh as I thought. You know what I mean? Like, yes. Obviously he's got a posh accent, I get that, but it's not like the kind of posh that like the other royals have,
sort of thing.
Exactly, and that a lot of other people I've come across have. So that was also kind of a nice surprise, and for me made it nicer to listen to. But the mummies and the willies were cringe.
Yes,
I'll be honest.
Yeah, I do find it a bit. Yeah. Do you find that a little bit weird, where like grown men are calling their mothers mummies, and like Willie, I can kind of like nicknames and stuff like that. But it does very much read. I mean, there's kind of like these internal family jokes that must be hilarious to them. But kind of like, bro, it's not, it's not as funny as you think it is, sort of thing. But I think it's narrating your own book isn't for everyone. I can fully understand why he chose to do it, because it is a lot of these books you kind of think that there must have been like what's the word? Not shadow written. What's the word? What's the phrase? I'm looking for?
And ghostwrite is and I think he did write this with somebody else. I can't find what the credit is now, but I think he did write this with somebody else who does get credit. So I guess not true ghostwriting, but it does very much come across as his own words. And I do think it's just, even if you take away like the royal aspect, I do think there's, it's an interesting story about grief and family dynamics and how families can kind of like not understand each other and how egos and things like that do play a part in one's personal life as well. But I think go ahead. It felt very like it was from a soap opera that I don't follow. is sort of how it felt. I'll be perfectly honest, because it seemed kind of like bickery and where, oh, this person hates this person and some drama happened between these two people. It felt very much like that. Like, yeah, I think there are some bits in there that are kind of the deep about grief and his personal experience, and, you know, the title Spare, that kind of whole thing about how he is a spare for his brother. That is, you know, that's deep. That is worth
deep, and it's gross as well, isn't it? It's really like,
yeah, for sure. But a lot of it does just feel kind of very, dramery, bickery, that kind of thing. But that's also, you know, a big draw of this was that whole thing of his side of the story, you know, that's been in tabloids and all that. So it gives that to people who are following it, and especially in audio as well. It feels very much like a one-on-one. You know, he's letting you in, telling you personally into your ear. You know, again, different experiences with different audiobooks. It might feel like you sat around a campfire with a load of people, or it might feel like this person's just talking to you. And I think this one was a kind of they're just talking to you kind of experience, which was quite good.
Yeah. So I think I can fully understand why it's on the short. I don't think it's one of my favorite titles on the shortlist, but I can fully understand why it made the cut. And then the last book is Making It So, a memoir by Patrick Stewart. Do you want to read the blurb out for this one?
Yes. So, from his acclaimed stage triumphs to his legendary on-screen work in the Star Trek and X-Men franchises, Sir Patrick Stewart has captivated audiences around the world and across multiple generations with his indelible command of stage and screen. Now he presents his long-awaited memoir, Making It So, a revealing portrait of an artist whose astonishing life, from his humble beginnings in Yorkshire, England, to the heights of Hollywood and worldwide acclaim, proves a story as exuberant, definitive, and enduring as the author himself.
Okay, so I didn't realise, that Patrick Stewart had released a biography. I wouldn't say I'm a massive Star Trek fan, but I am a fan of Star Trek. I am a fan of like Patrick Stewart, his roles in like X-Men and stuff like that. And there is a TV show in the UK called Who Do You Think You Are, which kind of goes into the past of like different celebrities. So I was aware of some of this story, especially about Patrick's relationship with his mother and father. So that cool part of the story I was somewhat aware of. So I was really keen and eager to listen to this. Were you a fan of like Patrick Stewart and stuff like that before you came to the book?
Yeah, probably not as strongly, but definitely. And for me, I think it's actually American Dad. And his voice work in that is probably where I know him, at least hours-wise, the best from. But also, since some X-Men and stuff like that, and aware of him as a figure and things like that. So yeah, I was definitely intrigued by it for sure. Yeah,
so one of the things while I was listening to this was not to make the obvious joke about like northern people, because he very much kind of, especially in the early parts of the book, stresses that he is a Yorkshireman, and I was very much trying to avoid asking you about if it is familiar to your childhood, kind of having
I do have thoughts on this actually, to be honest, because interesting that you say that, and interesting that you ask it that way, because my one gripe with this book, right, is he says things about the North and also about like the 40s and 50s, about the past, as if, oh, back in my day, you wouldn't understand this, but my experience is this. It's like, no, we know that. Like, so there was a lot, it was kind of like, people like, oh, people don't know why the save icon looks like that. They've never heard of a floppy disk. People don't know what records are. You never heard of a vinyl player. They wouldn't know how to answer an old... all that bullshit that's like, no, we're not idiots. Okay, maybe some people have managed to live under a rock and miss stuff, but there was so much that it just felt very like, I'm better than you because I know this stuff that you wouldn't know, or I'm better than you because I had to suffer this way and you couldn't even comprehend suffering this way. That irked me. Like kind of an outdoor toilet, like it was a foreign concept that no one's ever heard of before, and kind of like no one's ever spoken to their grandparents before because they don't know how things were in the 40s or 50s.
Yes.
That irked me. And again, with the kind of like, now in Yorkshire, we call that a this. And it's like, that's obvious. And maybe it's a bit of my Lancashire pride and my War of the Roses-ness. I was like, that's not just Yorkshire, mate. So that's my only gripe with it, I think. That, the regionally and time-wise, there was a lot of telling you stuff that that I think is interesting, but the way he presented it is like, I'm letting you know this elusive thing, it would just piss me off a little.
In Patrick's defense,
Yes.
what I would say is that I can imagine that quite a lot of his audience is not from the UK. Is not from the UK, is probably not aware of kind of like stuff we as, you know, people born and raised in this country are aware of, especially in terms of, you know, how poor the North is, you know, the poor, okay, how am I supposed to phrase how poor the North became?
The socio-economic situation in the North in the 40s and 50s.
Yes. So kind of like that's, I can kind of fully understand why he chose to kind of go into that.
Yeah.
And poverty did play, you know, from the sound of it, a massive part in his, especially in his early life. And I can kind of understand there, you know, there is a section where he does talk about kind of like Yorkshire dialects. And you know, to be fair, I thought, oh, come on, Patrick, why are you talking about this? I understood kind of the first couple of sentences that he came out with, the first couple of words that he said, but then there was a third sentence where I genuinely didn't understand what he's saying. Yeah, so I mean, there's you know, there are bits like that, and you know, Patrick's voice, I think, it's really interesting because like in my head, Patrick Stewart is Jean-Luc Picard. He's, you know, not a young man, but sort of someone who's full of like vigor and intensity and intelligent. And Patrick does sound quite old in this book, and you can kind of tell from the way he's breathing and enunciating the words. And that kind of touched me as well, kind of realizing, oh, he's actually an old man now, and kind of the ideas that you have of people in your head, time does passes and stuff like that. What did you think of his performance, just, you know, overall?
No, I thought it was good, as I would expect from someone with his kind of career and experience. Definitely, no, I think it was good, really pleasant to listen to, and certainly, as you say, the bits with the, you know, accent and dialect, that especially works well to be in audio, and for him performing it, you know, is so much better than trying to decipher it off the page that isn't really representative of how people actually speak anyway, and the whole point is that it's spoken. So that was really good, and he just performs it great. It's got a lot of heart, and it's just really pleasant to listen to. It's a really long one. It's almost 19 hours.
Yes, I got nowhere near finishing it beforehand, but
that's fair. And this one, I wanted to kind of like compare it to the what speed you listen to your audiobooks on related to how you eat your food analogy from our last episode, which if you've not listened to, go back to. This one, I definitely, even though it's long and I wanted to get through stuff before this, I did not want to fast forward at all. I wanted to hear it at his pace, and I wanted to sit with it. This is a long book that is not one for just trying to get through. It is one because you want to get it, because you want to sit with it, and you want to experience it, and you don't want to be ticking off, reeling through your TBR and your charts of you know, your book goals. This is a book because you want to listen to this book, and you want to sit down and you want to enjoy it. I think it's one you could put on before bed if that's how you listen to your audiobooks. It's really soothing. I think that's
quite dangerous because I can imagine you. Yeah, he's got a soothing voice.
Well, you put a sleep timer on. You go to sleep, and then you wake up and you rewind a bit. That's fine. And I mean, with 19 hours of that, you'll keep you going for a while. So I think that's kind of the style of that book. And just quickly to comparison-wise it, The Diary of a CEO. That I would eat like the Huel that Steven Bartlett is advertising on every YouTube video, and that I would blitz it up and drink it real fast and speed that quick through it. But this one is a sit-down feast. You probably got leftovers tomorrow, that kind of thing. But it's really good.
I would agree with that. I think it firmly deserves to be on the shortlist. I didn't finish listening to it, but the sections that I'm kind of like waiting to get to are the sections about, you know, the relationship he had with his father and his mother, and kind of like I'm not too sure if audiobooks do come with like trigger warnings these days. I don't think there was one in this book, but there is certainly a trigger warning if you are choosing to listen to this. You know, there is kind of like periods in Patrick's life where he does go through quite severe bouts of like domestic abuse, so it's going to be quite interesting to listen to how he tells those stories as well. Okay, so I think almost all the books that are on the shortlist deserved to be there.
I wanted to make one other thing actually about Diary of a CEO and it being on the shortlist though, and I wanted to know your thoughts about the audio specificness of it. Especially for the fact that, like, some of the quotes, a bit like we had in Menopausing, the winner of last year, you had recording of the people who said them, saying them. And then also this marker pen noise when he was, like, summarising the end of the laws. Yeah, what were your thoughts on those two audio bits?
Okay, so I understand why the marker pen bits are in there. In the book, there are quite a lot of drawings.
Yeah.
So that's why the marker pen is in there, is to represent the drawings. In terms of him having like podcast, except lots of audiobooks have done that before. I think there was which one?
Revolutionary. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not revolutionary. It's not like a massive trick. And I don't really think it covers like the weaknesses that I found in the book. In the book, how did you feel about it?
No, I think that's fair. I quite liked it. They didn't feel out of place, and it was quite nice having a different voice in there. So I think that was quite a good feature of it, doing it for this format. And then the pen noise, I mean, if it's replacing drawings, it doesn't really do that because it's not going to show you what the drawings are. But I did quite like it, I think.
Apart from it did separation, give me... I think it works okay.
I think it does kind of work, apart from the fact that it gave me flashbacks to those horrible times where you have to split up into groups and do a mind map on this massive sheet of paper and you've all got markers. And it felt, really, and you've got like team bonding-y stuff. Have you not had to do those kind of workshop-y things? Oh my goodness, I've had so many of those. And it was the exact sound of that. This is a very common experience. I'm sure I'm not the only one. And if you've had that, then that is exactly the noise, which is off-putting slightly. And I don't know, it felt slightly out of place with no other sounds, but it sort of worked. And I guess because that has that same kind of like corporate culture thing of those workshop-y stuff, it fits with that as well. But just thought that was interesting.
Okay, so I think that it's a very interesting list this year.
All author read, I thought was interesting.
That's very interesting. Is one criticism I would have of it is I do wish it was maybe a little bit more diverse. I mean, Steven Bartlett's the only person of colour on the list, and if I'm not correct, Fern is the only woman on the list as well. So, I would have imagined that there are loads of other books by women and people of colour that but it is a strong, I mean, I can't, Unruly deserves to be there. Alan Partridge, maybe Alan Partridge is the one I might boot from there just because I don't think it's non-fiction. But the other books, I can kind of see why it would have been quite a tough job to add more books to the list. Okay. The British Book Awards, the ceremony will take place on Monday, May 13th. I think the ceremony starts at 5 p.m. If you go to the bookseller.com website and look for the British Book Awards tab, it's under Nibbies. You'll be able to find a live stream of that. So please do let us know what you felt about the shortlist. You can get in touch with us over social media, or you can email us by going to audiobookishpod@gmail.com. If you can continue to support the podcast by leaving a rating and review wherever you've found us. And what else? Yes, once again, thank you to the team at the British Book Awards for sending us the review copies. Any closing words, Poppy?
No, that's all good. I hope you enjoy the ceremony and I look forward to watching.
Okay, cheers guys, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Say bye.
Bye.
Bye.